Super excited about having Dr. Carmen Black with us again another year. Today, we're going to talk about racism and women leaders of color. And Dr. Carmen is going to talk to us about her research and all the things that she's been doing, organizing and supporting women of color and patients of color. And so I'm really excited to hear, Dr. Carmen, what you've been up to. Thank you for joining us another year and for being in this space with us.
Thank you. It's like our 1 year anniversary today. I feel like we should go grab dinner, some cocktails or something.
I look, if we were to in the same space physically,
We
we
were in
would
the same
definitely
space.
do
You're definitely better dressed than I am right now. So I'm gonna have to go on and I don't know, take a shower, put on some makeup, something, because I
that.
gotta keep up with you, boo.
You look good
I'm
natural. Like
fanning all the glory your way. Just fanning it from there.
I
Take it in.
receive, I receive. And then you have the natural glow, like no makeup necessary.
Oh, I got the locks. I wake up looking like this. For better or for worse, it is very consistent. It's just I hope you like it because this is what it is.
I love it. No, I love it. It's natural beauty. It's beautiful. But Dr. Carmen, let me read your bio to just to go through, quickly your incredible accomplishments, and then we'll talk about what you've been up to since last year. How's that sound?
Love it.
Awesome. So Dr. Carmen is a native of Augusta, Georgia, and an honored second generation graduate of the Medical College of Georgia. She completed her undergraduate degree in psych and French studies at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. She's trained in psychiatry by both the University of Pennsylvania and her alma mater. Dr. Carmen joined the Yale School of Medicine as assistant professor of psychiatry in September 2019 at Connecticut Mental Health Center. And Dr. Carmen is dedicated to providing quality clinical care to racially minoritized populations with academic research. And I know there's so much more, Dr. Carmen, than that. So tell us, who is Dr. Carmen and what have you been up to over the last year?
Let's see. Dr. Carmen is a haggardly tired but completely loud-mouthed physician who is trying to raise ruckus and all the ruckus, just all the ruckuses. There's good days and bad days to be the rebel raiser within spaces as elitist and tightly controlled as medicine, but it's got to happen because all these medical organizations are saying, oops, my bad, racism is bad, but they don't have any representation to dismantle it. It's like asking someone with the problem to fix the problem without actually giving representation to the ones living the consequences of the problem. And so having that conversation when society and the body of medicine itself looks to us to be leaders, even though we're not leaders, we write disparities papers by the millions each year. And yet we call ourselves equitable, and society expects us to be equitable. So it's like, ooh, trying to highlight the little green men who only come out the bed in the dark is very hard because when you turn the lights on, they're not there. How do you prove something that they say is unprovable?
Dr. Carmen, I love how you started with that. And, when you talk about the representation to repair or to fix this system that's so broken, and, I struggle with that word because I think it's working the way it intended to work. But a system we know to be very unequitable and equitable for since the inception of this country. But you talk about the representation piece, and I'm wondering if you can speak more to that. What does that mean, and what does that look like?
Yes. So healthcare is completely detached from history and it shows up in all types of sneaky little ways. And so you mentioned yourself, like the system is operating exactly how it was designed. And yet, Americans have very short memories. And so, one of the things I do when teaching my curriculum or giving a talk anywhere I go is I go through the history. God forbid anyone shrug shoulders when at the end of my talk. I'm going, no need to shrug shoulders. Why does it work this way? Well, let's take a journey back in time. And then the other issue that in a historical approach is that when there is a victim of a historical crime, the modern harms of history, what are the outcomes today that were explicitly and intentionally designed yesterday? Who was the target and who are their descendants today? And how was it built? And without representation from people living every minute of that intentional harm, we have no blueprint for modern practitioners, many of privileged identities, many who aren't descendant of the folks who were harmed, many people who share a race, share an appearance with those who were harmed, but don't have the generational history. Oh, it's so fascinating. In medicine, we are still absolutely running all of our studies, all of our education, all of our practice by race instead of racial trauma. It's a very different thing.
And talk to us a little more about the racial trauma. And I know that in racial trauma in relation to medicine, what does that look like? Let's say, you know, during slavery time when there was no um, primary care for Black folks, Black Americans. What did healthcare look like for us then, and how has it evolved over the years? And if you can speak to that.
So, when we speak of the Black Americans who were enslaved in the US before the US was the US, right? When it was a landmass being stolen from indigenous nations, and then our ancestors were brought over to build it. And by our ancestors, I mean ethnic Black Americans who are descended from the people who were enslaved within the US. We have a very multicultural country today, and that's beautiful. But when we speak of history and when we speak of ethnicities, culture, who are the ones who made gospel? Who are the ones who built all these institutions? Who are the ones who built the infrastructure? Who are the ones who experienced Tuskegee? Who experienced Henrietta Lacks? In 1910, we had 7 Black medical schools. 7. The descendants of the enslaved had 7 Black medical schools when white people went through and said they weren't good enough, and they shut down all but 2. We are missing 36,000 Black physicians descended from the ones who were enslaved within this country by those direct actions of 1910. And yet, when we talk about digging ourselves out of this mess that was created on purpose, we have less representation of the generational narratives of all American damnation for 400 years today, less representation today than we did in even 1940, I would say, because there's many studies that just came out stating that Native Americans are dropping in representation and Black men are dropping in representation. I'll break that apart. So Native American, indigenous nations, they are the only other group who experienced every minute of all American damnation alongside the folks who were enslaved within the US, who were brought over, human trafficked to build this country. So Native Americans and the Black Americans descended from people within the enslaved are the only 2 groups who have experienced every minute of all American racialized damnation. And yet, so it's not a coincidence that representation of Native Americans is dropping, because healthcare and American folks, we're not really good at giving back what was taken. All of the stolen land, all of the stolen labor that went to build these pretty little shiny medical schools. I'm sitting at Yale University, literally built on enslaved labor stolen from indigenous lands. I'm sitting here. And when we talk about, oops, my bad, slavery was bad, okay. But when we're giving opportunity, very little intentionality is given to give back the stolen opportunity from the descendants of the ones harmed. What does this look like? It looks like saying, well, we need the best. We need the best GPAs. We need the best test scores. We need the best universities. So we can only have the best doctors, right? And in a multicultural nation where Black Americans are so diverse, we have folks from Nigeria, the Caribbean. We have British Black folks. We got Black folks from all over the diaspora. That's beautiful. But for the ones who were intentionally denied opportunity of 1910 and experienced every minute of enslavement, Jim Crow passed these narratives down from the baby bottle. You know, privilege is transmitted through opportunity, through trauma, and through cultural narratives, right? And these have been intentionally denied to Native Americans and folks descended of the enslaved, and very little effort. The folks descended of the enslaved, we don't even have a name. Our name used to be Black Americans. We share that now. right? We don't have an ethnic identifier other than a descriptor, very long. Black Americans descended from the enslaved Africans within the United States. That's like saying my oldest daughter, the oldest daughter of Carmen Black is named blah blah blah, instead of just naming her. A name is powerful. So how can we dismantle inequity and the ones we harm don't even have a name?
It's so interesting, and I love everything that you're saying, especially when you're talking about representation of Black Americans that are descendants, direct descendants of slaves. I think we forget about that group of people that, you talked about when if you've destroyed something or if you've done something wrong, what's the recourse? And I think that's what we're not seeing. We're not seeing the recourse, the right representation. And we're throwing them all in one melting pot saying that, well, we've done it. Look at you. But they're not Black Americans descendant from Black slaves. So wondering if you can speak to why you believe that's the case and what would be your remedies for.
Gladly. So I'm working very much in the work of Patricia Hill Collins, and she wrote the famous book Black Feminist Thought. And one of the beautiful points about her book is she writes how to challenge knowledge claims. How do you have the right to know what you know, and what background informs what you think you know? And so, speaking from a minoritized perspective, I'm going to limit it to Black Americans descended of the enslaved and our buddies, the indigenous nations, who equally experienced trauma for every minute of this country's history. We have knowledges of American history. We are living history. Literally, we have survived, we built. And when we say, oops, my bad, we're sorry for enslavement. Oops, my bad, we're sorry for 1910 when we shut down and destroyed all your opportunity to become doctors, right? People who arrived later in time don't have those same generational knowledges. And so, if we were trying to take an analogy of let's renovate a really old house, great. Do you have the blueprints? Well, what are the blueprints? So, we might call in the plumber to fix the pipes. We might call the roofer to fix the roof. We might call in the home decorator to fix your decoration. But all of us who have lived in old homes or thought of purchasing one, we know you go to the basement, the oldest foundation of the home. And no matter what you do to the upstairs, none of it will last. None of it will stick. None of it will make sense until you inspect the foundation and fix the broken foundation. And so these are the languages. It's not in competition with the expertise of the roofer. It's not in competition with the expertise of the, you know, floor specialist. Is to say we work together. We have complementary knowledges and skill sets. And how do you renovate an old home? Well, you don't start at the top. You go to the oldest part as a prerequisite. And so medicine is trying to dismantle inequity, but it is missing representation of the descendants who represent the oldest parts of its wrongdoing. And so we're trying to navigate modern harms of history, the intentional crafting of how we came to be, but we don't have any blueprints. Now we can work side by side, right? The foundation repair specialist is not competing or diminishing the expertise of the roofer. But I don't care how good of a roof you put on there, if your foundation is sloppy, it's not going to work. And medicine has to be reconnected with the people who have experienced every minute's harms because we have knowledge to contribute to all. We all work together. Now, diversity says anyone who's not a white, straight, wealthy male, you win, right? That's the diversity narrative. And diversity lives in the moment. So when George Floyd happened, the diversity narrative adapted to Black Lives Matter. When COVID happened and there were traumas perpetuated onto our Asian community, diversity adapted to stop Asian hate. So diversity must appropriately live in the moment. But restoration, right? Restitution, justice for past harms, that's a separate conversation that does not compete with modern times. But just like the foundation repair specialist, that's more like history, right? So my work is trying to create a new language of restoration and justice in medicine and representation, not diversity. By representation, that is everyone according to their makeup, right? So if we have 9% this, we need 9% that. If we have 20% this, we need 20% that. Diverse means I could have 50 of those and 3 of these, but as long as none of them are old white men, we've succeeded. And that's a flawed narrative. Justice, representation is better attached to history, and it says everyone according to to their portion.
I love how you laid that out, Dr. Carmen. I'm thinking of so many things that I want to share, a recent article that I read, but just to the two things that really stands out to me is the restoration and representation, as I think you cannot have restoration or restitution without representation,
Mhm.
and you can't have representation without the restitution. The two go hand in hand, and I think what we've seen is we've tried to sort of isolate the two concepts, but they have to work together. And I think what we've also done in all of our systems that we see these pervasive inequities is we're not thinking about the restitution aspect of it, and then we're throwing band-aids on what looks like representation, but it's not real. It's almost
It's
um,
diversity, but it's
it's
not representation.
it's di- exactly, it's diversity, and any diversity could mean anything, right?
Mhm.
But is it truly representation? And no, the answer is no. We know that already, right? And so I'm thinking about how, where is the space for Black Americans that are descendants of slaves, to actually be accurately represented in a way that's integral, in a way that's intentional, in a way that's deliberate,
Mhm.
in every system where we have been harmed, whether it's medical or mental health or child welfare or juvenile justice, criminal justice system, housing system, legal system. Where are the opportunities for us to actually be represented, and what are the next steps for recourse and restitution, and when does that happen? And I believe it doesn't happen until you have the proper representation, because until you have the ones that were directly impacted and harmed, you're not going to have the right advocates in those places advocating for the right things. So I'm thinking about that, and so I would love for you to hear your point of view, especially from
Yeah.
the medicine
So
stance.
the reason why representation is hard is that when structural changes, structural inequity was perpetuated. Let's go back to 1910. We had 7 historically Black medical schools. And then the National Medical Associations, which still exist today, and the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, is called the Flexner Report of 1910. And white normativity closed intentionally all but 2 of those medical schools under the name of progress. And the reason why they didn't close all Black medical schools is because they say we need just enough Black doctors to go do Black things in the Black clinics to keep the Black germs off the white people.
Sure.
Fast forward today, we still have that narrative, but with a positive spin. So today you'll hear Black doctors are more likely to go serve Black patients. Black doctors are more likely to do Black research. It's not a justice narrative, it's a workforce narrative. I need a body in the minoritized clinic that nobody with privilege wants to go do. It's not Black doctors deserve representation because they built the university, right? It's
Wow.
not Black doctors deserve representation because everyone according to their portion. It's Black doctors to go do the Black stuff. So we're not saying Black doctors have knowledge necessary to uplift medicine. That is not the narrative. And the reason why representation is harder than diversity is that the ethnic Black Americans, alongside the Native Americans, are the only ones with 400 years of all American educational deprivation. Now, if I took someone with 400 years of intentional educational deprivation and compare it to someone with 5 years of
Wow.
possible deprivation, right? And now we say everyone needs the best test scores. Who's going to have the setback? That's where you have to give it back. But because we don't have a name, you can't give back resources to someone who doesn't have a name. So we're doing it by race instead. We're running clinical trials by race and not trauma. It is
Oh,
trauma that is making Black Americans descended of the enslaved have difficulty achieving normative benchmarks because they designed it for us since the day we were human trafficked here. It's trauma. not race. We are so the starting point is to honor. We are all Black Americans. We all belong. Welcome. This is the United States. I feel like the only ones who should be able to talk about immigration reform should be the indigenous nations because we stole their land and we were brought over to farm it, right? Welcome. There is room for everyone according to their portion, right? Everyone according to their footprint, everyone according to the trauma that is literally represented in our DNA. And so the starting point in the conversation is saying that being different is not a bad thing. I am happily partnered to a Nigerian man with two step kiddos who are so Nigerian, I'm still sponsoring their immigration. When my ethnic Black American self gets off the plane in Abuja, Nigeria, oh God, they have 1,000 different types of Black folks. You got the Igbo, you got the
Oh,
Yagala, you got the Fulani, you got the oh, they speak
yeah.
ethnicity all day. So, what we're asking for is a very similar process where differential histories of American trauma are honored. That's it. So that by honoring it, we can fix it. We can't, if we just leave the narrative, yeah, we love Black folks, but you got to be good enough. Well, the ones representing everything you did to this country are intentionally designed to have a hard time being good enough. That's literally the point of the conversation. Like, it's not rocket science. Like, the whole reason they're apologizing is because they did things again and again and again to people who are so beautifully stubborn we didn't sit down and give up. So now we need a name because in a multicultural society, we need a name. Like if my partner and I were to take a trip to Nigeria, I'm sorry, let's go to Australia, and we both have American passports now, and we both are Black Americans. How would we describe the Black American who is naturalized with a footprint of 5 years and the Black American who originated the country if I don't have a name? We're all Black Americans, but the nomenclature I'm advancing is ethnic Black American versus naturalized. But the starting point is to honor. We are all Black Americans. We all belong, but we have very different histories with very different conversations.
This is so good, Dr. Carmen. And I feel like I've been preaching this for, over a decade and really trying to differentiate in these spaces that the experience of the Black American that descended, what slave descendants are, is so vastly different. We barely have any. The only thing that connects us really are is our skin color, our
And
culture.
how we're treated in modernity, right? So my partner is a giant Black man. He's 6'4" with a deep bass voice.
Right,
So police trauma, they're not asking for his ethnicity before they decide if they're going to harass him or not. That's
right.
why diversity is so important, right? So our brothers and sisters from the diaspora, they're saying we face anti-Black racism too. Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. But we're also talking about a 400-year head start.
What I also notice, I have some African colleagues in different parts of Africa, and when they come over here to visit, they're shocked. Whereas this is our story, we know this. This is they're like, why are people staring at me or stopping me, or why am I treated a certain way? And these may be individuals or colleagues well in their 40s and 50s, and this is new to them. Whereas this is in our DNA. This is intergenerational. This is passed down. This is what we all we know. And I do believe that does affect not just our mental health, our where we are socioeconomically, our medical health. It affects every part of our being,
Yes.
really. And so, for whereas someone that's naturalized here, you maybe have been had to deal with this for 5 years. Well, we've been dealing with this for about 500 years. It's been passed down from generation to generation. There is a different history, there's a different story. And so, you talk about representation. I'm wondering, we're almost coming to a close. We didn't get to talk about your research, and I'm
This
just
is my research.
is
Literally,
this
that's
your
the
research?
sad part. That's the sad part. My research is literally proving that we exist after 400 years. That's literally my research.
We
Ain't that
exist.
sad? My research is literally proving that a people have an ethnicity after being separated from a continent for 400 years. Now, if I were Darwin talking about some birds and evolution, a little canary flew over to this island for 400 years and the canary other one stayed home, people would say, yes, of course, they've evolved. But when we try to talk about representation to American enslavement, people will dance around the issue, and now they're dancing around the issue through ambiguity.
Yes. And I think the ambiguity is a cop out and is a way to not honor, a way to not have recourse or restitution. So I think that's what Black people want, right? We've seen even, and I'm all for what's going on and saving humanity with the immigration crisis, but we've seen a priority over other groups and such a neglect, a negligence for Black American descendants of slaves. And I think it's very hurtful, it's disappointing, to not acknowledge and to
But
not
it's not
have
a
any.
competition. It's
Of
just
course.
we were the prototype.
Yeah.
Native Americans were separated since they stole their children and sent them to boarding schools and did all types of trauma to the kiddos. We've been separated since the auction block. We're the prototype of the border crisis. We are the prototype. That's what I'm
We
saying.
are.
Until you go to the basement and fix that raggedy mold, yes, it's all trauma. Yes, we are on the same page. Accountability to trauma. But if you start at the top of history, you ain't going until they're ready to have the real
Real,
conversation.
real conversation.
Justice to Native Americans and descendants of the enslaved is justice for all because we're the prototype. Every family separation, they've been separating us for 400 years.
400 years.
It's not a competition. It's a
Absolutely.
continuation of the same narrative with new bodies and new faces representing the trauma that's been the same thing, adapted for modern history, but the same disregard for life.
I'm thinking of absolutely Dr. Carmen, and I'm thinking of, and I don't remember the article, so I apologize, I can't quote the source, but it was about a woman that had gone on a search on ancestry.com, and she was able to trace back her roots, um, several generations. And what she found was pretty shocking that her great 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 grandparents were actually slaves of a congressman's great 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 grandparents. And there was no recourse, there was no restitution. And then what was shocking in that same article was that of course that congressman and his family, they're millionaires. They own a house that's over 120 million dollars, and no restitution, no nothing, no reparation, no recourse. Just, oh great, you found it out, live your life. Meanwhile, this person, who knows where she is socioeconomically, but her it was her ancestors that were enslaved to his ancestors, who I'm sure built the wealth that they're enjoying today. And then in that same article, I think it quoted, I can't remember, approximately 30 or 20% of those that Supreme Court judges and congressmen and politicians, their ancestors were slave owners. And we know this, and what do we do about it? What's the next step?
So, in conclusion, it's if anti-black trauma, because this is about trauma, right? If anti-black trauma ended with enslavement, then yes, we would be unjustified to still be raising ruckus today. But we can open a book and see anti-black trauma changed after slavery, but it did not lessen, right? So it's very important for us when we're trying to talk about you owe me something, privileged folks. It's not about slavery. It's about every minute of intentionally designed damnation from head to toe, from job to uterus. A homeless white woman has better birthing outcomes than I would as a doctoral degree holder,
Wow.
right? That's intentionally designed. So when we talk, and we'll talk again, probably this time next year, what's up? But we have to talk about it's not about slavery. It didn't end there. It's about every minute of eternal damnation since then.
This is so good. And we don't have enough time. I do want to do this, and this is a little unconventional as we're coming to a close. I really, really want those that are watching, especially my social workers, my educators, my